I want to welcome all of you tonight to an event that truly has been a decade in the making. We founded No Labels in 2010 because we believed there was something deeply wrong with our politics. We believed the only way forward for our country was for Democrats and Republicans to find a way to work together and solve problems. And now, amid this historic crisis, we are finding more and more people across this country who agree with us. No Labels work is a mission for me and one I do as a full-time volunteer. I am so excited to welcome you to this first of its kind event we're calling Congress Comes to You, and to bring to you the courageous leaders of our Congress who are carrying the torch for this politics of problem solving. And before we introduce our members of Congress, I want to bring on Ryan Clancy, our chief strategist, to tell us a little bit more about how we got here and the path forward. Ryan?
Thank you so much, Nancy. As Nancy said, we have been at this for a decade, and at times it's felt a little lonely. People thought this effort was crazy, that there's no way we could bring Democrats and Republicans together. But now people are realizing something else. This idea isn't crazy. It's essential. They're realizing that the only way we're going to get through this crisis is together as Democrats, as Republicans, and as independents. For those of you who are new to us, what No Labels does above all is organize. We organize citizens across the country, and I want to give a credit to a lot of our leaders here who are on the phone. You are part of the biggest event we've ever done. So tonight, by an order of magnitude, we've never had more participants on our call, so thank you so much for all you've done. And we organize leaders, bipartisan leaders like the ones you're going to hear from tonight. These members are part of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and there has never been a group like them on Capitol Hill. They are 50 members, evenly divided between the parties, and they're working to find a solution. If you want to know what it is that binds these members together, it's really two things. One is the trust that they have in one another, that they have built up over months and years in meeting rooms, working on legislation together. But the other thing is courage. And it's the courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when their own parties don't necessarily like it. They do it because they believe it's right. We believe that these problem solvers are part of a new governing coalition, not just of House members, but increasingly of senators who are working with this group too. And we believe this group is not only going to lead us to get through this crisis, they're going to help us emerge stronger on the other side. And we are very excited to bring 10 of them with you tonight. So to moderate our discussion, I'd like to hand it over to one of No Labels' longtime leaders, Andy Bursky.
Thanks, Ryan. Ryan, Nancy, thank you for helping put this together. I want to welcome everyone to our first No Labels virtual town hall. Congress Comes to You. I hope you are all well in this trying time and working hard to stay that way. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us this evening. You know, even before the COVID crisis, the Problem Solvers Caucus had demonstrated its capacity to bring folks from both sides of the aisle together to take on our country's toughest problems and to find bipartisan solutions and a path forward. That muscle memory, those relationships are even more important in the context of today's crisis. So we're excited to have members of the Problem Solvers Caucus here with us, including our two co-chairs, Tom Reed and Josh Gottheimer. The format tonight, we're going to give each of our leaders here an opportunity to make a few opening remarks. I'm going to ask that you try to those to a couple minutes each. And then we are going to open the floor up for questions. There's a chat function on Zoom. Please indicate who you are, where you're from, and put your questions forward. We will collect those and ask our congressional leaders your questions. So before we do that, let me now turn it over to my good friend, a great leader of the Problem Solvers Caucus and of the U.S. Congress, Congressman Tom Reed from New York.
Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you to No Labels. Thank you to everyone out there tuning in this evening for this event. And you know what has been said, it couldn't be stressed enough. What we put together here, you know, I've been in Congress since 2010. There's some new members that you'll be meeting tonight that just joined Congress this session. And the common bond that you will see from all of us that we are committed to leading and to being proud Republicans, proud Democrats, but at the end of the day, committed to America and going to Washington, D.C., which I think you want members of Congress to do, and that is to have the debate, to be passionate about who you are, passionate about your ideology, but stay in the room and have a conversation about the issues before us and find that common ground. And that's what these members do. That's what we've done now for 4 years when we officially created the caucus and got the official bylaws, where we went from just talking the talk to walking the walk. And now these 50 members, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, are leading in an historic way. We changed the rules of the House last congressional session, for example, to allow members to have the power when they do the hard work of getting bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle, that they're guaranteed to have a vote on the floor of the House and have that idea brought forward. That didn't happen before. The institution has retreated to its corners, and it retreated its power to certain offices, be it the leader's office, be it the speaker's office, be it the four corners, as they're called inside Washington, D.C., the two leaders of the Senate and the two leaders of the House. And what members want to do is they want to legislate. They want to represent people, and that's what we do on a regular basis. So I will defer to the members of the caucus. I chair it on the Republican side, and my best friend in Congress is Josh Gottheimer, the Democratic, and I don't offend, I know I say that and I offend all my colleagues on in our caucus on a regular basis saying that, but Josh has become truly one of my best friends. And I have his back, he has my back. We talk, we have a trust relationship like you wouldn't believe, and we share ideas, we share different others' points of views, and we always have each other's back, and it's a gentleman to gentleman friendship. And so I just want to tell you, all the Problem Solvers Caucus members have those types of relationships. And it's the only forum in Washington, D.C. where this trusting relationship occurs, where we can actually have the dialogue, and we spend an incessant amount of time together talking about issues that face the American people. So I defer to them. They're the true leaders. I just happen to be the guy that wears that title of chairman of the group on the Republican side.
Thank you, Tom. Great to hear from you. I'm going to turn it over now to our other co-chair, Josh Gottheimer. Josh, if you could, you've been in the middle of some of the most critical discussions from the very beginning of the coronavirus, beginning when 14 problem solvers were invited to the White House Situation Room. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience and the role that the Problem Solvers Caucus is playing now in the context of the current crisis. Josh, you're with us?
Josh is getting on in just a minute.
Okay. Well, let's let me move on to Congressman Swazi then, if we might. Go ahead, Josh.
I could see all of you, and I could hear what Tom was saying. You couldn't see me, and it's a shame that I don't feel the same way about my best friend. Just kidding, Tom. But I want to just begin by thanking you, No Labels, for what you do and for how you're bringing the country together, Democrats and Republicans, to do what we should always be doing, which is putting America first. And I just want to thank you for what you do. And to my co-chair, who I spend way too many hours of my life on the phone with and while working things out, I just want to thank him for being such a good person and just an incredible leader, and someone who's made my time in Congress so much more enjoyable. And I'd have to say that really to the entire, you've brought together an incredible group of people, Andy, not just in the country, but in Congress, and all the representatives who are on the phone. We all talk to each other pretty much every day, and we have throughout this crisis. And as I've said to some of you, Andy, I think we were talking about this, we're very used to coming together and working together despite our differences of party. We figure out how to actually solve problems all the time, and we've been doing it now for a few years. And so when we faced this one, we were able to quickly put together thoughts of how we believe the country should best move forward. And whether we'd started in the Situation Room when Dr. Birx's first day with the Vice President, and talking about how we could come together to pass bipartisan legislation, emergency legislation, to help individuals, help our businesses get immediate response to the country. And then it's continued every single day since then. So I really just want to thank my colleagues who do such an incredible job, and who've got who just understand that to govern, it means you got to talk to each other and you've got to build trust. And that's what this whole thing has been about for us, is building relationships and trust and understanding what our job is for the people we represent. So thank you for having me. We're now very focused on a plan to how we reopen America safely, and what that looks like. And we've been spending a lot of time on that. And so I want to thank the Democrats and Republicans who are on this call and have come together, and for what they do every single day. And I'm looking forward to taking questions also. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Josh. I want to turn it over to Congressman Fitzpatrick. Brian, I want to take you back a couple years when the rules package was brought to the House floor, and as I recall, Josh told you didn't have to vote for the rules package, and yet you did. And, you might want to explain what that's about, but you talk about profiles and courage. That just struck me as what this caucus is all about. So, Brian Fitzpatrick, Congressman.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks to all of our no-label supporters, all my colleagues. Jamie, your son's looking great there. He looks like he needs a haircut, though. He's a cutie. Love him. Hey, thank you all for being on the call. Yeah, to Andy's point, you know, we talked about last cycle how the problem solvers were working really, really hard to get a rules change to the system to make it a little bit easier to do what the problem solvers do, which is to try to build bipartisan consensus from the center out. We're now 50 members, the strongest we've ever been, the largest we've ever been, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans. But we found last cycle that a lot of what we were trying to accomplish, we came up with great bipartisan ideas, but they never saw the light of day when it comes to floor votes. So one of the things that we as a caucus committed to was that whoever held the majority was going to hold that speaker candidate's feet to the fire to make sure that we got the rules changes, and the minority agreed, whoever that minority was, turned out to be us, that we would stand by the leaders of our caucus on the majority side to make sure that we got the rules package passed. So Josh Gottheimer, a man of his word, fought hard to get the majority of our rules proposals enacted into law, and myself and Tom Reed, going against our party, did something that hasn't been done in decades. We actually voted for the majority parties or the opposite parties' rules package. Hasn't happened, Tom, you probably know, I think it was decades, probably back to the 80s or 90s the last time that's happened. So, but it was a sign of solidarity and a sign of good faith that we wanted to send a message that you know, we got to keep our word to each other. Josh kept his word by holding the speaker's feet to the fire to get these rules changes passed. Myself and Tom kept our word in the minority that we were going to stand by the majority members of our caucus. It turned out to be Josh, to make sure that we stood in solidarity to get that passed. So that's what we're all about. You know, we stand by each other. We're friends with each other. We sit together at the State of the Union address together. We go to each other's district swaps. We work together and we function the way every relationship in our lives works. We come to the center and build consensus. So with that, Andy, I yield back.
And Tom Suozzi also,
Thanks,
right,
thanks.
was also pretty bold, right, Fitz?
Tom, yeah, Tom's my vice chair in crime, my partner in crime. I like him better than you, Josh. No offense.
Yeah.
And let me turn to Congressman Suozzi. Tom, you're in a hot zone in Long Island. Long Island's been hit hard by the crisis. You have been a great leader for decades on Long Island, dealing with issues, hospitals and healthcare delivery and so forth. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the Problem Solvers Caucus has enabled you to address this priority.
Well, thanks very much for hosting this tonight. I'm not sure how many people are actually on the call, but I've seen some of the comments come up and people say, let's get to it. Let's start talking about the issues that are out there. So As we face the coronavirus right now, we have to recognize that every problem we face in America is complicated, and this is no exception. And to solve complicated problems, you need people of goodwill who are willing to sit down and talk to each other and figure out the solutions to complicated problems. You can't solve the problems we face in an environment of fear and anger where people don't trust each other and they won't work with each other and they're just working for their partisan advantage. So that's what we're trying to do with every issue, and certainly now with the coronavirus. So when looking at the coronavirus issue that we face in the country, is two big pieces. One is healthcare, and the second is economics. Healthcare, you have to look at four pieces. Prevention is number one. Stop people from spreading, because the system, if it spreads more and everybody gets it, the hospitals can't handle all that pressure. The system will be overwhelmed. That's why we have to stop the spread. Prevention, prevention, prevention. That's why everybody on this call, everybody in America, I think there's 1,000 people on this call right now. Everybody has to make sure that we're doing our part to stop the spread. The second most important thing is testing. We have to test now. It's been so important currently and earlier in the crisis, but it's going to be more important going forward as we try to reopen the economy, because we have to know where the hot spots are and where we have to react to. We have to know who's infected. We have to know who is immune now because they've been through it already. So testing, testing, testing is so important. Third thing is treatment. If we could figure out a treatment, we wouldn't have a crisis. People would get sick and they get treated and there wouldn't be a problem. Right now, we don't know what the right treatment is. People talk about remdesivir, which Gilead is trying to do clinical trials. People talk about hydrochloroquine. I've heard people talk about, you have to drink hot liquids and breathe in steam. There's so many different things that people all have ideas about, some that are scientific based, some that are homespun. But the reality is we don't know the right treatment yet. And until we find the right treatment, this will remain a crisis. And the fourth issue is vaccines. One of the things that everybody in Congress came together on the first of the three packages we did was to put $3 billion towards figuring out a vaccine, but it'll take another year. The second piece is the economy, and I won't go into all the detail, but when looking at the economy, we have to look at individual people, and that's unemployment insurance, that's the $1,200 paychecks to different people. You have to look at small businesses, that's the Paycheck Protection Program with $350 billion in it. You have to look at big businesses, big strategic industries that are important to America. We're going to have to think about for the long term which industries we must make sure that work is being done in America. A big problem is we can't produce these masks and gloves and gowns in America because they're being produced overseas because it's cheaper there. But on a strategic basis, we have to think about the long-term future about producing them here in America. Same thing with prescription drugs. A lot of the raw materials are made overseas. Fourth is looking at infrastructure, big, huge infrastructure for the future to try and get the economy going again. And then healthcare. That's a big issue, protecting our hospitals. In my state, in New York and New Jersey, where some other folks are from, I see friends here, Michigan, it's so important, Louisiana, these places that are hit that are so hot. We have to make sure that these hospitals, as well as our states and local governments, are getting help to get through these hotspot times, working together, Democrats and Republicans, putting our country first, looking out for the common good. We will get through this thing. I'm sorry for talking so long.
Thanks, Tom. Let me turn to Dean Phillips. Dean, you have a history as an entrepreneur and a businessman, and now you're in Congress. And one of the critical issues is how we get business back in business as we recover from this COVID crisis, and how we do it responsibly and safely. I know that's central to the discussion that you're having at the Problem Solvers Caucus and developing a plan to do so. Perhaps you can comment on your work in that regard.
Thank you, Andy, and to the over 1,000 of you on tonight's call, and to my brothers and sisters in my favorite caucus in Washington, the Problem Solvers. The Problem Solvers operate the way Congress is supposed to, which is thoughtful people with a variety of backgrounds and perspectives who sit down together once a week and talk and develop relationships, trust one another. And I have to tell all of you that it is the favorite hour of my entire week in Washington. And if there are any silver linings in these difficult days that we're facing right now, it's that I get to spend even more time with my fellow caucus members via Zoom. So to all of you who support No Labels, thank you. It is the most important initiative, in my estimation, for the future of the country, because of all of your support, we can inspire people to come to Washington and not sit on the sidelines or throw snowballs, as Pete Stauber and I tend to do to one another, rather throw ideas across the table. So thank you all. As for business, my background is in distilled spirits, Belvedere vodka, ice cream, Talenti gelato, and now I own a little coffee shop chain of 4 units. And to those of you on the call who own businesses, I feel your pain. These are unprecedented times. And I also have a message that we're going to get through this. But my heart goes out to everybody suffering with health issues and, of course, economic challenges. You know, with that said, we have to focus on relief right now as we find ways to both mitigate the disease, treat the disease, and hopefully vaccinate the disease. Once we get to the recovery phase, and I caution everybody, we shouldn't do it too quickly. In the business world, you don't want to advertise until your product's in distribution. And this is the same thing. We don't want to stimulate an economy that is not yet ready for it. And the seed that I want to plant with everybody is to recognize that we're going to be a different country when we emerge from this, whether that's a matter of weeks or months or even over the course of a year. And we have to take into account that psychology, that changed psychology of American consumers. And one thing that we're talking about at the Problem Solvers Caucus table, which is unique because we actually do sit down and talk and trade policy ideas, is we got to come up with ways to stimulate the economy based on new psychology. There's going to be a disposition to save as we move forward. There's going to be fear, anxiety, lack of interest in congregating in public places. So we have to be thoughtful policymakers and come up with ideas to inspire a return, if you will, once it's safe. So my last invitation to all of you is please share your ideas with us. We've got some great people at our table, but we're a small group in relative terms. And as I always say, the best ideas will come to Washington, probably not come from Washington. So I hope you'll share your perspectives. You've got wonderful people who are committed to working together, even when we see things differently. And I've never been so optimistic and hopeful as I am now about the future. So thanks to all, and look forward to hearing your great ideas either tonight or down the road.
Thanks, Dean. Congressman Pete Stauber from Minnesota. We've had some questions already and some comments about supply chain. I think the COVID crisis laid bare some of the issues of our global supply chain and its exposure, particularly in the area of PPE. Perhaps, Pete, you can comment about some of the thinking going on in the Problem Solvers Caucus about rethinking America's supply chain. Pete, you're on mute. You'll need to unmute yourself. There you go. Oh.
Andy, I appreciate the Problem Solvers Caucus and the leadership that Tom and Josh have given us. Specifically to your question on supply chain, it has become readily apparent that there are parts of our country where the supply chain is not where it is needed. We can look at medical equipment. We can look at, I'll give you an example, the medical gloves that we use, Andy, almost, and this comes directly from FEMA, almost 100% of them come from the country of Malaysia. I want to bring not only the medical and pharmaceuticals in our country so we can have our own destiny in our own hands and not have to worry about any other country giving us these pharmaceuticals or strategic pieces of equipment. And I will say this, Andy, I represent northeastern Minnesota. And if you look on the map, northeastern Minnesota has it's the most mineral rich area of the country. And right now we have iron ore. The iron ore that we mine up here produces 60% of the steel we make in this country. Steel making is incredibly important. We have gold and platinum metals and copper and nickel mining that's on the cusp up here that we don't have to worry, or we don't have to ask the countries of China and India if we can buy more rare earth minerals for our national and strategic defense. So in Minnesota, the Problem Solvers Caucus is going to look at the ability to have that supply chain where the sources are responsibly sourced. You look at the countries of China and India where they use child labor and zero environmental standards. We have it right here in our great state of Minnesota, in the country that we call the United States of America. And so, Andy, as we go forward, I am going to be front and center on making sure that the problem solvers understand that the supply chain, both on the pharmaceuticals and the medical devices, which all use those critical minerals, that we can mine them right here in the great state of Minnesota with the best environmental standards and the best labor standards to make sure that those strategic minerals and metals are developed here and they're in our hands for this country. We will not be self-reliant on countries that don't have our best interests at hand. So and the problem solvers are going to lead this. The problem solvers are going to lead this in our nation's capital. I have all the faith, and I know that this country, we're going to get through this. We're going to be stronger, more resilient, and more self-reliant, Andy, than we've ever been. And so, you know, I look forward to after we get through this, we are going to we're going to move forward in a bipartisan way. And I can trust me when I say the problem solvers are going to be leading this charge.
Thanks, appreciate it. Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, it's great to have you with us. We're missing your son already, but you have addressed one of the important issues that is very timely. The PPP, a signature component of the CARES Act, was funded with $350 billion in the CARES Act, almost all spent at this point. There is seemingly a logjam in the Senate dealing with the $250 billion add-on. Perhaps you can talk about your position, the Problem Solvers Caucus position on this important and immediate issue.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm just going to apologize in advance. If you hear my children screaming, they're all fine. They're fine. They just sound really bad. It's dinner time. So my husband's like, I think it's like he's throwing food to hungry wolves. So honestly, this has been, I have loved being a part of this caucus. Thank you to No Labels for hosting this event tonight. But I feel like the amount of information that kind of flows both ways, like our ideas can get put together in a coalition, and that coalition has governing influence. It has influence in the House, which is huge. And then certainly the information I get about what's happening around the country has been really helpful. So being in Washington State, you know, we were kind of the tip of the spear in terms of the COVID crisis. Our social distancing, our physical distancing is a new way to say it. And a lot of the efforts we've taken have seemed to really flatten the curve. We're not out of the woods, but we're in a good place. And, you know, we started the conversations about how do we reopen the economy when it's time. Obviously, I do think that, you know, that's not an easy answer to give, but how do we prepare? What do we do? And some of those things have already been talked about, but one of the things we've seen was with the Paycheck Protection Program that was passed as part of the CARES Act, which we support, as you mentioned, is pretty much almost out of money. And maybe it's been around a little bit over a week in its inception. And the uptake has been amazing. So on one hand, it is going out. That's what we wanted. Obviously there are challenges. Obviously there needs to be better guidance, and there's some uncertainty there, but it's something that we want to see continue. I'm actually working on a bill with a former Problem Solver Caucus member who will be rejoining, I'm sure, at some point, but Derek Kilmer from here in Washington State to authorize or reauthorize the PPP with basically make an extension and add money to it. And there'll be we put some of the things we're hearing now, which has to do with guidance and clarity for how the program can be best used. But I think, you know, there is not a business. Oh, did you hear the baby? That's actually the littlest one who sounds like a hungry wolf. There's not a business or an individual or a family who has not been impacted by this, period. And obviously there are two phases, and some parts of our country haven't begun to slow down yet, and the curve hasn't flattened, or they haven't even seen the wave yet. But as we see this in different areas, my hope is the solutions that we're bringing together as a group are something that we can then model for some other areas. I'm sorry, she's shrieking. One thing, I'm so glad I have to apologize for this, because now everybody's in this boat. Everybody's got kids in the background, or, you know, a husband who's crawling around on the floor trying to get stuff and stay out of the view. But I do think that our our efforts as a group is part of how we're going to lead our way through. You reference what's happening in the Senate right now. It's a little bit of their chess match. And, you know, they can have a little bit of time to play around, but they don't have much. They need to get this money out the door. And I don't care which of them I need to come to the table to talk turkey, it needs to happen. And I think this caucus is such a fabulous example of how you can actually put solutions on the table and move them forward, even if you don't agree on everything. You don't have to agree with everybody in your group, but I think right now, our constituents are so anxious to see more of the, whether it's extension of the PPE or, you know, we've been talking about manufacturing, getting our supply chain in order. Those are all things we can agree on. And I'm excited to help with this group make those things happen.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Let me turn to the youngest member, but longest tenured member of Congress in the Problem Solvers Caucus, Congressman Fred Upton from Michigan. Congressman Upton, you've been part of the caucus and also been active in our bicamerals. We talked about some of the challenges in the Senate. Obviously, bills don't become law until we get passage in both houses. Perhaps you can talk from some historical perspective of the role that the bicamerals are playing in bringing together great ideas from the House with your colleagues in the Senate. Fred, you're on mute. If you can unmute, please.
All right, there. It's okay, right?
Good.
I'm trying to be a grizzled veteran. You can tell that I've stayed inside the whole time. The barbers and all the work here in Michigan. Let me just say a couple of things. I had my start in the Reagan administration, and it was a great leader, great president for the Democratic Congress, and he got a hell of a lot done because he didn't care who got the credit. And when I think about my 34 years in the Congress, and I chaired the Energy and Commerce Committee for 6 years, we have term limits on the Republican side, I changed the rules of the committee to foster more bipartisanship, to encourage Republicans and Democrats to work together on literally every single issue. President Obama was in office then, and we had more than 200 bills that he signed into law that we were able to shepherd through the House and the Senate, all obviously bipartisan. And that's where this group really came into play. We sat down, we said, how do we change this place? We are all so frustrated. How do we change it? And it had to start with changing the rules. And that's why Josh played such a critical role at the beginning of this Congress, because he insisted, enough Democrats were there to insist to change the rules. Otherwise, it would deny Speaker Pelosi the votes. We would have done the same thing on the Republican side. Even though all of us are the closest friends with Kevin McCarthy, we would have said no to the speakership there unless we changed the rules, and we got them done. And that's really the proof in the pudding. Now, for me, let me just say this group, and I told them this a few weeks ago, this group is why I decided to run again in the Congress, because we are getting things done. We're doing the things that all of us wanted to do when we first ran for office, to make a difference. None of us really had a desire, I don't think, to be a political star or be able to get things done. But together, we have stuck together, and we're going to stick together. And as Dean said, this is the best hour of the week. And weeks like this, when we're all trapped at home, we're spending a lot of hours together talking about the future and how we can work together and move this country forward, because no one else on the face of the planet can do that. And this group can really make or break, you name the issue.
Thanks, Fred. Appreciate it. Let me turn now from our most grizzled veteran of Congress to our least grizzled, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. The Congresswoman is a great example of the new breed in Congress. Terrifically talented leaders who have spent their lives providing service to this country. Congresswoman Spanberger comes out of the intelligence operations and joined Congress and continues to serve the country in a terrifically impactful fashion. So, Congresswoman Spanberger, if you can comment on your observations on the efforts of the caucus as it relates to bringing the country back on stream. You're on mute.
There we go.
Great.
Yeah, so, and I've had the opportunity to look at some of the comments and questions being posted online while others were answering. So let me give a really specific example of a place where we have come together attempting to solve a problem, bringing people together, talking about an issue that is otherwise sometimes heavily partisan and political in nature, and that's the issue of immigration. And the Problem Solvers Caucus really led on an issue focused on a couple things. One, we have a challenge at the border, right? So a bunch of us, some of us on this call, traveled to the border last year in a bipartisan delegation because there were reports coming out. You see people on TV saying, this is happening, no, this is happening. And sometimes it felt like here we have lawmakers who are experiencing two totally different things. Did they even go to the same place? Because there was some partisanship that was coloring their view of it. So a group of us decided we're going to go together. And the commitment of going together is we're traveling together, we're talking together. And after we spend our time kind of visiting all of these hotspots, meeting with local officials, meeting with immigrants, meeting with ICE and talking about what their needs are, we're going to sit down and we are going to, this is not just a trip, this is actually a working event, right? And this is pretty straightforward. It shouldn't have to be so notable, but this is not necessarily the norm. So we sat down in the conference room in our hotel and said, what are the problems that we observed? What are the challenges that ICE agents told us about? What are the problems with DHS? What are the, what are some of the things that really struck us? And made it a focus and a real movement within our own caucus to try and address challenges. So I represent a district in Central Virginia, heavily agricultural across our 10 counties. 7 of them are rural and agricultural communities. And labor in our agricultural communities is an important issue. So a number of the problem solvers said, immigration is an issue that is often used as a wedge, but there are problems. There's problems at the border. How do we handle those? There's a problem where we have a workforce that may not have legal status, but they are needed in our nation's farms and agricultural businesses. But there are not enough H-2A visas in order to actually get workers here legally. And so there are all these systemic problems, and we all boil it down to challenges immigration. Well, the challenge is it's a humanitarian one, it's an economic issue, it's an agricultural issue. How do we take a step back from what is otherwise at times an emotionally driven partisan issue and just look at the problems that we need to solve for the American people? So a lot of work went into creating a wholly bipartisan bill that recognizes we've got workers who are here, who need stability, who need the ability to continue working where they're working. They have children who are American citizens. How can we give them a pathway towards stability and legal status? And then we have agricultural businesses and farms that need access to workers, and not just the ability to get more H-2A visas, but for our dairies and our greenhouses, which I have in my district, folks who can work year round, because it isn't the seasonal work that you might have on your row crops, for example. And then when they have workers who really do want to come to this country seasonally, come work the fields, go back home, and then come again the following season, how can we ensure that they have an easier path to getting the same workers, less expensive? They've already been vetted. We know who they are. They can come here legally on this visa program. And so we drove a major initiative within Congress to make this bill bipartisan. And frankly, knowing even in today's day and age that it might not get a vote in the Senate, that this is an important step for us to take to demonstrate to the American people that while we do need overall comprehensive immigration reform, we can pull off pieces of a problem and we can define that problem and we can create legislation that will actually address a major component in the larger immigration discussion, the issue of our agricultural workforce, the issue of there not being enough visas, the issue of the fact that when there are not visas, there are still farms and agricultural communities that are hiring people. And we were able to address that through legislation with broad bipartisan consensus. And so I think that when we're thinking, we've talked a lot about COVID-19, we've talked about the response, we've talked about the impact of changing the rules, the things that the problem solvers have done there. But it's all of these places where we say, like, this is a hyper emotional issue at times for people. Let's take a step back and let's actually try and peel off what we can and solve the problem. And even in this case, you know, when we knew it wasn't necessarily going to get a movement forward in the Senate, it's still super important for us to demonstrate that we can legislate in a way that is focused on addressing a real issue, not using something as a political wedge, and ideally driving that change forward into the future.
Abigail, thank you so much. Congressman Lloyd Smucker from the great state of Pennsylvania, if you could perhaps talk about the work going on right now in the caucus on the Get Back to Work program. Pick out one element where you see an opportunity to help drive the agenda and have an impact on Congress.
Thanks, Andy. Nancy, thank you for scheduling this call. Very much appreciate the work of No Labels in supporting the Problem Solvers group. You know, in Congress, you have a lot of great people, but too often the incentives are to go to the extremes. We all have to come through primaries. We have to get elected to do this work. And there aren't many groups that are sort of incentivizing individuals to really come together and to work from the middle to try to find solutions to problems. It's easy. People in my district, and I live in a fairly conservative district. I'm probably one of the most conservative members of the Problem Solvers, but I really believe people send us to Congress to get things done, to solve problems, and to come together, to find ways that we can work together to begin to solve these problems. This is exactly what we're doing. Of course, the coronavirus isn't Republican or Democrat. It's affecting all of us in all of our districts. It has a huge economic impact. You know, one of the areas you asked to talk about, just one specific area, we talked about the PPP, the Payroll Protection Act, but I've been spending a lot of time in my district with small and medium-sized businesses for whom this really is a lifeline. It will keep these businesses afloat, keep employees on payroll, which is absolutely critical. You know, we're going to get through this. It's going to be a period of several months. We don't know exactly how long that will be, but we need businesses to be there to re-energize and reinvigorate this economy when we're able to open back up. And so, you know, I think that is a part of the CARES Act. We had talked about the funding earlier as well. We're going to come together as Congress and provide additional funding. We have to. I see the impact on our businesses. I see the need in our communities. We're seeing this in every district across the country. So I'm confident that we're going to come together and get that funded. But you know, again, it is so critical. The small businesses and the medium-sized businesses are really the lifeblood of our economy. And this is an important program to ensure that they're there again to rebuild this economy.
Thank you, Lloyd. Tom and Josh, I think what we may do moving forward here, we've got a long list of questions. I'm going to start asking them. I'll turn to you, and you can turn to one of your colleagues to assign to answer the question. So here we go, and folks, keep your questions coming. This is a question from Bernadette Frager, an RN from Los Gatos, California. Bernadette, thank you for your service as a frontline warrior in this battle. Bernadette wants to know if there's anything the caucus can do to put pressure on the White House to increase the scope of the Defense Production Act, particularly as it relates to—
Andy, we couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Bernadette is an RN from Los Gatos.
You're breaking up a little.
Bernadette is an RN from Los Gatos. Is that better? She has asked if there is a role for the caucus in putting pressure on the White House with respect to the Defense Production Act, particularly as it relates to PPE.
You want us to, how do you want us to do this, Andy? You want
why don't you assign one of your colleagues to respond to the question?
All right, Josh, why don't you go first maybe, and then we'll go from there. And why don't you guys text me? Text me.
Yeah, and somebody wants this, text me. And somebody wants this, text me too. Abigail, you seem to be smiling, so I guess you want it.
Oh, I love the issue of PPE. So PPE, personal protective equipment, not to be confused or muddled in our ears with PPP, payment protection plan. So the challenge here, and many of us from Problem Solvers went to the White House, met with the Vice President, met with members of the Coronavirus Task Force early last month, and to demonstrate our bipartisan focus on what at the time was a growing pandemic in the early stages of threatening the United States in a meaningful way. Among the challenges that many of us raised were the pipelines of supplies that we knew would be challenged. And there's been bipartisan efforts within Congress to, I introduced a resolution calling on the president to make, and the administration to make full use of the Defense Production Act. That was fully bipartisan. Colleagues from both sides of the aisle, some Problem Solver Caucus members, some not, joined in that effort. There's also another bill that is the an Emergency Supply Act. There's also, and I've seen in the comments, some focus on the supply chain issues as it relates to China. You know, when it comes to the United States military and our warfighting capabilities, we do not rely on foreign nations for our supply chain of you know, vital military materials. And so there's a strong effort among folks on both sides of the aisle to ensure from a legislative perspective that we are able to ensure that we have supply chains of the personal protective equipment that we need. But kind of getting at the heart of your question, there have been many of us focused on this issue of PPE, calling on the administration to use the Defense Production Act, which it uses regularly for things like the purchase of rare earth minerals, for the creation of lasers, for a variety of defense-focused priorities. And I will speak for myself. I've been very, very disappointed by the speed and the hesitancy by the administration to use it. So to answer your question, there are a lot of folks who are trying to push the administration on this from both sides of the aisle, members of Problem Solvers Caucus and outside. But this, while many of us have been coordinating through our Problem Solvers network, this hasn't been a Problem Solver-led initiative.
Well, and I think we got Jamie Herrera Butler, but I will tell you one thing that Defense Production Act we discussed in the Problem Solvers Caucus, and what we do is we delve into the details of it. So there are issues with employing and deploying the Defense Production Act, such as supply chain disruption. What are you going to do to that industry that's supplying critical equipment for dialysis machines, other machines that you're now displacing to put into effect to get PPE or to get a ventilator built? All those issues, I could go on to hours of debate on that, but that's what we do in the Problem Solvers Caucus. And Jamie Herrera Butler wanted to offer some from our Republican side. So Jamie, please.
Thank you. And I think Abigail's 100% right. I wanted to take with regard to PPE, not to be confused with PPP. Yeah, and there is a lot of focus on this right now, and it is bipartisan. The one thing I wanted to raise that I know members of this caucus support have to do with the getting the supply chain fixed with regard specifically to generic prescription drugs. When we went to the White House 6 weeks ago, it's all blending together now as a group. This is one thing I raised with the vice president. I said, by this summer, if it isn't already happening, which now it is, we know there are COVID-affected supply chain issues within the prescription drug market, meaning your prescriptions, if it's a certain type, could be placed on hold. You could only get smaller supplies. There are questions there, and we asked that they immediately begin to address this. I actually left a letter with him. I've also had the opportunity to question pharmaceutical companies. You know, a whole group of them came to the Hill to talk about the different vaccines and types of treatments that they're working on. And I'm glad American industry should be working on these. But my next question that I didn't get a satisfactory answer to was, what are you going to do if the generic prescription drugs that our people, our constituents need, they don't have access to them? How are you going to step up and fill that gap? And I am still pushing to get an answer from them on some of those issues. And I know that's something that this caucus is very focused on, is making sure that affordable prescription medications and the supply chain is addressed. I think this is one of the opportunities we have to try and bring some of that manufacturing back to the United States that has been seeping overseas for years now. And this is, I think, with regard to PPE, certainly, because if our economy is ever going to get moving again, we have to have the supplies, we have to be able to test. But I think on the big picture, this is an opportunity to try and get some of our prescription manufacturing capability back. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. We have several questions on the phase 4 stimulus. One in particular from David Stell from Bristol, Pennsylvania, interested in the Problem Solvers Caucus position on phase 4, and in particular, if the caucus will actively oppose all special interest items that are not directly related to the pandemic.
Tom, you want to take that on your side first?
Yeah, so who wants to go first? I saw that Brian Fitzpatrick had his hand up on the last question. So we'll go Brian and then Stauber there.
On the last question, but I'm happy to take this one as well.
Yep,
No, I think, listen, I will not speak for my colleagues, but I'm pretty certain we all share the same view that this time-sensitive, urgent crisis we're in, the legislation we pass has got to be narrowly tailored. This is no time for Christmas tree ornaments, pet projects, or anything like that. There's a time and a place to have those debates on whether those items should be included in certain packages and funded. But with regard to COVID-19, it's such a time-sensitive manner right now that we got to make sure that our legislative response is narrowly tailored and focused towards this. Now, we've already gone through 3 stim packages. The first one was, about $2 billion. The second one was about 5+, if I'm not mistaken. The third one, obviously, the CARES Act was 2.2+ trillion. And they were all done in a time crunch, and because of that, there was a lot of things that got missed. So I'm sure my colleagues are hearing a lot of the same things that I am in my district about how it's we're taking care of the payroll for companies 500 employees and less. We're taking care of the bigger, the Boeings and the airlines that are national security critical and economically critical. But a lot of these small businesses that may be slightly over 500 employees, because of the affiliation rule or the FTE calculation, the full-time equivalent calculation puts them slightly over 500 employees, but yet they're not big businesses, and they really need our help, and they've fallen through the cracks here. So I think they're the group that we really need to focus in on, including the nonprofits. We got to take care of our nonprofits. These are the organizations that serve our most critically in need community members, whether it be NOVA or Women's Place or the YMCA or what have you. We got to take care of them. And we got to take care of our small businesses that are over the 500 employee threshold. But to answer the question specifically, I don't think there's any time, place, or tolerance for anything outside of COVID specific response. There's a place and a time to debate that later. I yield back.
Yeah, and just from our side, and maybe Dean wants to talk, I just want to say before I hand it to him that, I'm in a district where we've had 15,000 people sick. And lost more than 550 people. It's awful. And I think the way our whole caucus has been looking at this is, what do we need to do now from a health crisis and make sure that we help people and we get through this together, because we will get through this. And then we have to look at it from a economic crisis, which we're also addressing. And there's short-term economic pain, which so many people are going through in our small businesses and our workers, and so many people who are hurting and losing their livelihoods. And then of course there's going to be long-term considerations that we have to focus on to reboot the economy and make sure that we can stand back up when the sun rises again. And I think we're thinking about these in pieces. We've got to make sure we get through now, but we're also thinking ahead, whether that's looking at infrastructure or other issues to really boost our economy. And we're going to need it. We've really shut the economy down for the health of our country and the safety of our families, and which was the right move. But we also were trying to think through both at the same time. And what's been so incredible about this group, and I have to say again about the Problem Solvers Caucus, what we do is we have these tough conversations. We don't always agree, but we trust one another and we're willing to work together. And we want to govern and we want to put our country first beyond any political considerations and party. And that's why this formula works. And we're going to keep at it. Dean, I know you have had some real deep thoughts about this as well.
Well, I'll start by saying when the problem solvers were invited to the White House just weeks after the freshman class was sworn in, about a dozen of us, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, the president exclaimed that, you know, if we could meet together, we would get stuff done. And it's a perfect analogy to the Problem Solvers Caucus. If we, the people on this call and the ones that sit at that table every week, were entrusted with doing what's in the best interest of the country, rest assured that we would get things done. That's why we got to expand our numbers from 52 to a bigger number than that. You know, with that said, I think this poses actually a great opportunity for us and the country. And rather than further creating divisions in Congress, I think this crisis might actually have the opposite effect and bring a lot of us together. The spirit at our table has been remarkable. The spirit amongst those who care deeply about doing what's right for the country has been inspiring. And I believe we're going to do better moving forward. An infrastructure plan and package was pretty much unachievable just a matter of weeks ago. That is an example of something we might come together on over the coming weeks. And furthermore, you know, this is an opportunity for the country, all of you on the call, and all of us around the entire nation to decide what kind of country we want to be moving forward. And we also have to do so in the context of a national debt that will exceed $25 trillion, annual debt payments, debt service that will exceed $425 billion, if not more. And, you know, very significant fiscal restraints. The only good news is that our competitors around the world are even in a worse predicament. But our nation seems to come together in times of crisis, and I believe we are in a micro fashion, and I hope we do as a macro fashion as well. And I'll close my remarks by telling all of you that we are still a 19th century institution now operating in a 21st century world, and Congress was woefully ill-prepared for something, frankly, that we should have been prepared for, a pandemic, a national emergency like this. And I believe many of my brothers and sisters on this call and at the table are inspired to try to bring the institution into the 21st century, respect our traditions, certainly abide by the Constitution, but make us a more flexible, nimble, forward-looking, thoughtful institution. And that means using devices like the one we're on right now so that we can actually debate, deliberate, and perhaps even legislate from afar in the time of national crisis. So there's a lot of opportunities ahead. I'm optimistic about it, and it's going to take all of you on the call, the supporters of No Labels, to help inspire that and bring more people like the ones you're seeing right now on your screens to Washington.
It's a great message. Folks, keep asking your questions. We're not going to obviously get to all of them, but we are capturing them all, and we will consolidate them and get them to caucus for their consideration. We have a question from Maxine Clark in St. Louis, similar to several other questions that we've received, that while COVID-19 affects all of us, it affects us unequally, and it has the most severe impact both in terms of health issues and in terms of the derivative issues on the most vulnerable communities. What learnings have come from this? How does the caucus think about this issue in terms of disparity of impact, and how is that shaping your consideration of legislation now and potentially legislation in the future?
Tom, you want to lead that one? Or you want me to, all right, well, I guess it's my side first this time.
Yeah, our tradition is go.
Yeah, sorry. On our side, anyone want to grab this one? Abigail, looks like you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I'll speak to this because I know Jamie and I both come from states that have been really impacted where, you know, there are many populations that are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19, the elderly, the infirmed, those with pre-existing conditions. And we see real disparate levels of fatalities among the elderly and minority populations. And I mentioned Jamie because she comes from the West Coast where they had a tremendous outbreak in nursing homes, and now we're seeing that in Virginia. We now have 45 deaths in a rehabilitation center in my district. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have been collecting demographic data, and it is my expectation and my hope that every elected lawmaker at the state level and at the federal level will want to dig into this data as it relates to the COVID-19 deaths, because unfortunately they already, from what we are seeing, show the great disparities that exist and how underlying health conditions that, be it because of food security issues, be it because of underlying health issues, or treatment within hospital systems, we are seeing real significant impacts and high mortality rates among Black Americans. And it is vitally, vitally important that we learn lessons from this pandemic and work to strengthen our healthcare system, recognize that we need a stronger, healthier population for a whole host of reasons, be they economic, be they humanitarian, be they national security focused. But this pandemic is demonstrating the disparities that exist. The disparities that exist in food security issues when as representatives, you know, the children who are staying home from school who do not have access to the nutrition assistance programs on which they rely, and the real challenges that these closures are creating. So it is vitally, vitally important that we learn lessons from the impact of this pandemic. We recognize the disparate impact, and we endeavor to move forward and honor those who've passed away or who have suffered greatly by strengthening our community, strengthening the systems that would in the future ensure that we have far less negative outcomes, and that we are learning from what has happened in the past and honoring those who have died by ensuring that it doesn't happen again.
So on our side, I don't know if any of our guys want to jump forward, but I know Josh had to go put the children to bed, and Dean's going to handle on the other side. But one of the issues, and I think all of us are sensitive to those populations that have been acutely impacted by the coronavirus. But one of the things that I think makes us very committed as members of the Problem Solvers Caucus is we look at issues truly from the perspective of America, and that, you know, we have rural America, we have urban America, we have minority populations, we have issues that impact women and men differently. And what we always try to do is make sure that the big picture of helping people as Americans, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but at the end of the day, have an honest debate to find that common ground to help most Americans out. And that's one of the things I find most attractive to my time in the Problem Solvers Caucus is identity politics is really not something that drives us. And not to say that this is identity politics, but we don't spend a lot of time engaging in that partisan rhetoric, that division that so often is on display in Washington, D.C. Because, you know, to be perfectly honest with you, we're sick and tired of it, just like most American people are. I mean, we will have the debate. We will make sure that those populations that are acutely impacted, that they rise to the top, they are prioritized, and that the relief is there for them because substantively they are in that unique situation. But one of the things that I really do appreciate about this caucus is these are serious legislators, and at their heart, they are, again, committed to the country and the survival of the country as a whole.
Tom, that's a great note for us to conclude on. I'm going to turn it over to Margaret White, but I want to thank each of you. Look, we are all in this together. Nothing brings us together more than a crisis. And for me, and I think I speak for many on the phone, we couldn't be prouder to have a group of committed legislators like yourselves who are working together to do the important work and to deal with the tough challenges that lie ahead. Let me turn it now over to Margaret White, one of our key leaders, to close us out. Margaret.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you to all of our members tonight. And thank you especially to all of our citizens across the country that have tuned in. If you've liked what you heard tonight, please be sure to join us. We're hosting these Zoom calls every day at 3 p.m. And the other thing that you're gonna see on your screen right now is what we want everyone tonight listening in to do with us. Come back, join us again for our next big event on April 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're gonna be rejoined by our Problem Solver Caucus members that you heard tonight, as well as some of their Senate colleagues. So if you'd like to join us, please be sure to put your email in at nolabels.org, right there on the main page. And please share it with your friends. We've made it really easy right there to share it on your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter, or your Facebook. We want to spread the word. We want to make sure that other folks out there in the country are able to find us and tune into these really important conversations. So go to nolabels.org, share it with your friends, and we will see you all again, hopefully April 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern.
It's Margaret White in speaking.
Thank you, everyone, and we will talk to you then.
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Keep the faith.